Good morning and welcome to today's webinar on Beyond Zero Emissions Million Jobs Plan. This webinar is hosted by the Energy Transition Hub and the Climate and Energy College at the University of Melbourne. My name's John Wiseman and I'll be your moderator for this event. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which we are joining this webinar, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and to the Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be joining the webinar today. Our speakers today are Eytan Lenko and Heidi Lee. Eytan is the Chair and Interim CEO of Beyond Zero Emissions, and Heidi is Interim Chief Operations Officer at BZE and Project Lead for the Beyond Zero Emissions Million Jobs Plan. As many of you are aware, Beyond Zero Emissions has made a huge contribution to the Australian energy transition debate over the last 14 years, producing many carefully researched and highly influential research reports. And BZE's latest project, the Million Jobs Plan, is particularly relevant to our current challenge of ensuring pandemic recovery strategies maximise employment opportunities while driving an emergency speed transition from fossil fuels to renewables. Eytan and Heidi will talk for a total of about 30 to 35 minutes, and there'll then be time for about 25 minutes of questions. Please submit your questions throughout the presentation in the usual way by clicking on chat, writing your question, and then clicking the raise hand button so that we can identify them easily to allow them to speak. We'll try to get through as many questions as we can, but please understand we may not be able to cover them all. Eytan and Heidi have also offered to stay on and chat for a short while at the end of the webinar, so I'll let you know when that occurs. Finally, I need to let you know that this seminar is being recorded, and the recording and slides will be available on the College and Hub websites in the next few days. I'm now delighted to welcome Eytan Lenko and Heidi Lee. Over to you.
Thanks, John, for that kind introduction. Thanks to both John and Natasha for organising this webinar today. It's been amazing to see how rapidly everyone's adapted to this new form of presentation, and how easy it is to get a bunch of people together to listen to good ideas. So it's almost, there's a lot of good things that have come out of this. And obviously, I'm going to be talking about hopefully yet another one of something good that's going to come out of this. So I'm just going to share my slide screen. Just hold on one second. Okay. So as John gave a nice introduction, my name's Eytan Lenko, and I'm the Chair and Interim CEO of Beyond Zero Emissions at the moment. I have a background in technology. I'm a software engineer and a computer scientist, and I studied at Melbourne University myself. And I've been involved with Beyond Zero Emissions since back in 2009 when I started volunteering as an engineer on the stationary energy plan. And I've gone on to become a member of the board and the chair of the board, and currently interim CEO during this exciting time. Heidi, would you like to introduce yourself too?
Yeah, it's lovely to see everyone. There's so many familiar names in the participants room, so it's great to be among friends here today. I'm Heidi. I've worked for 20 years in the building industry and just left at the end of 2018 to focus on climate emergency solutions. Been something I've been passionate about for a long time, and like Eytan, I've been involved with BZE not since 2009, I think 2010, just before the Stationary Energy Plan was launched. I'm not an engineer, so with my architect background, my contribution to that was doing some diagrams. I've gone on to have quite a few different roles at BZE, and it's been such a privilege to get to know lots of you here today over this time, and to be coordinating this incredibly important and really timely piece of work right now.
Thank you, Heidi. So I won't spend too long introducing BZE, because hopefully many of you have heard of us before, but I will say that Beyond Zero Emissions is a really interesting organisation, something that is still, now that I'm more across what's happening across the world, I still find pretty unique across the world. An organisation that brings together engineers, scientists, technical experts to literally work out how Australia can thrive through a transition to a zero carbon economy using today's technology and doing it in a time frame that the climate science is telling us that we need to do it at. We've been recognised through international awards such as the Prospect Think Tank Awards, which awarded us Best International Energy Think Tank last year. And last year we were also recognised in Victoria with a Premier Sustainability Award for our work on our electrifying industry plan. So Beyond Zero Emissions has done a lot of work across all the different sectors of the economy: buildings, stationary energy, land use, transport, and there's another one that I always forget when I do this list. And where we've gone from there is bringing our research to specific regional areas. So our theory of change really is that we do the research to show how the Australian economy can decarbonise in an effective way. And we also work with local communities. We have a Zero Carbon Communities program that works with over 50 communities across Australia to help them with their decarbonisation plans, so that we bring all of our research to bear on a specific regional area. And recently, as back in 2009, 2010, we were pretty out there in the stuff that we were saying, even though it made a lot of sense technically. But where we are today in 2020 is that business and industry have come a long way to recognising a similar vision to ours. And thanks, Nina.
And I've been leading
an
industry program at BZE, which has really helped to bring together the aspirations and the technical capacity that Australia has, and actually translating that into business strategies so that we can find, especially high energy users, opportunities for them to create decarbonisation plans for their business that really closely relate to the recommendations that we've made, especially recently in the electrifying industry work. And that's really where that program is focused at the moment.
Thanks, Heidi, for rescuing me. My daughter just brought me a piece of cake, which is nice. So a great example, I guess, of where our work has had impact recently is last year we relaunched our 10 gigawatt vision for the Northern Territory. And, in hindsight, it's kind of a sort of a similar situation to where we're finding ourselves as a country at the moment. So the Northern Territory economy was in the doldrums. However, in terms of the way people were thinking about how to recover from that, it seemed they were missing what to BZE was the most obvious opportunity, the incredible world-leading renewable resource that they have in the Northern Territory. So Beyond Zero Emissions put together a plan that showed how the Northern Territory could take that renewable resource and put it at the very centre of their economy and have access to some of the cheapest energy in the world rather than the most expensive energy in Australia, which is what they have at the moment. And it showed that access to cheap energy would mean that they could do a whole lot of stuff that they can't do at the moment. So things like minerals processing, large scale manufacture of hydrogen, a manufacturing industry, solar mining, electrified transportation, all these things that would actually be strengths for the Northern Territory if they base their economy on their renewable resource. So we put that plan together and we built a coalition of supporters around that plan, representing capital, business, politicians, the community, and we had a series of roundtables up in Darwin after we launched the report. And really, it was a very positive vision that showed that the Northern Territory has an incredible economic opportunity. And it was amazing to see almost like the light globe turned on in the Chief Minister and people in government there. And since then, we've seen a real pivot in the direction of the Northern Territory government to move the economy in that direction. So the recent policy drafts, basically have taken the Beyond Zero Emissions plan and put the Northern Territory government logo on them. And not only these drafts, they're also restructuring government internally. So they've got a Department of Climate Change now, which they never had before, and are hiring a whole lot of people to help with renewable investment and electrified manufacturing investment. So we're seeing a lot of movement in the Northern Territory. And that really showed BZE the power of a strong and positive vision that's backed by a coalition of credible supporters. Another good example is our Collie at the Crossroads report. And Heidi, maybe you would like to just quickly take everyone through that.
Yeah, so this was basically produced at almost the same time as the Northern Territory report. And in Collie, the issues were a little bit different. So in Collie, just outside of Perth in Western Australia, they've got coal mines and coal-fired power stations that are already slated to close. And the real standoff here has been between people who need local jobs and a state government that really wasn't well set up to provide the answer to what comes next. So Beyond Zero Emissions, we worked really closely with the Climate Justice Union in West Australia to form an alliance between 4 different local union groups and state government groups and investors to look at the different types of initiatives that we could install in or near Collie, that's called the Collie-Bunbury region, so that this area, this region, has really strong, viable employment opportunities for the coal workers, ones that actually represent things that coal workers are well equipped to do. I think the colloquial sort of like phrase that gets thrown around is that the one of the initiatives that the state government has installed over there is a really big BMX bike trail. And it became a bit of a flag in the sand for what coal workers do not want to do with their next job. They do not want to be baristas. They don't want to be tourism workers. They really have incredible skills to be able to bring to the manufacturing sector, the recycling sector, and actually they can be the backbone of building the renewable energy technology and infrastructure that we need to be able to transition the economy to 100% renewables. So this is a project of a different scale to the Northern Territory proposals, but here we were really looking to replace 1,200 local jobs in coal with 1,750 new jobs in renewable powered industries. And obviously some of these are even more important today when we're looking at rapidly getting millions of Australians back to work, that we need to be investing in renewable energy products, we need to be investing in sustainable building materials, because we need to make sure that when we do rebuild, that we're not creating more problems that are already in our economy today.
Thanks, Heidi. So that brings us to where we're at today. And obviously we all know we're all here on this webinar because Australia is at a crossroads. We know that in response to the economic downturn caused by coronavirus, that billions of dollars are going to be spent in the coming months and years. And Australia really has a choice. We can double down on a non-competitive, inefficient, polluting economy, or we can move towards self-reliance by electrifying our infrastructure and powering it all with cheap, reliable and efficient renewables sourced in Australia. So when we look at a stimulus program, and there's been some great work done by groups like the Australia Institute recently to show what the difference is between good and bad stimulus spending, but ultimately it boils down to that it should create jobs and it shouldn't be wasteful. And it's not wasteful if it brings forward spending that would have happened anyway and encourages private sector investment. So what's the trend of the economy, and how do we bring forward that trend, accelerate it to create jobs today? And if we look at the trend of the economy, I think the way that I like to think about it, and the way BZE thinks about it, is that there's been this long-term trend from analog to digital. We've seen it in communications, we've seen it in computerization, we've seen it in lots of different areas of the economy. And when we're thinking about energy, that trend is personified by the move from fire-based technology, literally burning oil, coal and gas to create some heat, and hopefully some of that heat goes into the thing that we're trying to achieve, to digital electrical technology, which is very efficient, clean, it's distributed and modular, it's cost effective, it's scalable easily, and if we power it with our own renewables here in Australia, it's also self-reliant. So this is the trend that the economy is going on anyway. So, and the question only is this something that's going to happen over the next 50 years, or is it going to happen over the next 10 years? But any stimulus spending that accelerates this transition and brings things forward is going to be an efficient use of stimulus spending. Anything that pushes in the wrong direction, so when you hear talk about a gas-fired recovery or something like that, that's pushing against the trend of the economy. That's wasteful spending, because it's going to lead to stranded assets and inefficient job creation. So Beyond Zero Emissions, when we think about our Million Jobs plan, there's basically the way that we're thinking of putting it together, or the way that we are putting it together, is across two streams of work. There's the big picture, nation building, big infrastructure projects that will create lots of jobs and, you know, accelerate that transition from analog to digital. But as I said, Beyond Zero Emissions also have our zero carbon community stream, where we work with 50 local communities. So we've been able to go back to those communities who are all on various stages of their decarbonisation journey and are often blocked by a lack of funding or, you know, a particular project that needs to be done. And we've been talking to them about what are those projects that will help them accelerate their decarbonisation journey. So how much funding would it require, how many jobs would unlock, how quickly can they get it going? And we can then put together that list of hundreds of local projects spread throughout Australia. And by bringing those two together, we have an inspiring big vision that shows how the whole of the country will benefit and we can create lots of jobs. But also with those local community projects, it makes it a lot more tangible. You can actually imagine the change in your local community. You can picture what your life, how your life might change for the better. And it creates a whole lot of social license and buy-in for the plan, rather than just having a big abstract vision that people can't connect back to themselves. We've put together a pretty good advisory panel, so you can see some names here, and there's more names to be added. So these people are all providing their advice and feedback as we go in our research. So clearly we're getting good technical advice, good strategic advice, and good political advice. And ultimately, if you're going to create a million jobs plan, it really needs to add up to 1 million jobs. So we'll go into these in a bit more detail, but this is the overview of where we're at in our research at the moment and where we're finding these jobs. And you can see that the big three areas are fast tracking renewable energy and transmission, which is obviously needs to be the backbone of any decarbonisation plan. Buildings are very jobs intensive when we're talking about retrofitting lots and lots of buildings. And manufacturing, which I think it's great to see manufacturing really coming on the radar on this conversation, through this conversation, you know, about that there's a very strong trend in the debate that Australia needs to bring back and expand its manufacturing industry. And BZE has done a lot of work in this space, and, you know, we think there's a huge opportunity there. So we'll go into some detail. I might hand over to Heidi to talk you through some of these areas.
You might, you will.
Sorry, I will. I shouldn't use conditional.
Don't worry, we get editors involved in all our reports before we publish. So, of course, the backbone of all of this, like Eytan said, is about being able to build out massive amounts of renewable energy. This will be this initiative here, the top-down initiative. This is talking about what renewable energy we can add to our grid today. So we're looking at 130 gigawatts of projects already in the pipeline. And over the next 5 years, if we were to build out just 90 gigawatts of those, we'd be coming up to like 100 to 150,000 jobs. Now, because this is work in progress, you will see job ranges on all of these, that we're not locking ourselves into the exact number yet. But at the moment, these job numbers, the ones that we land on in our final release of this chapter, will include the transmission upgrades that are essential to make sure that this clean, renewable energy reaches the places that need it most. And we're looking at setting our targets around these numbers, not to indicate what a complete decarbonisation of the grid looks like, but actually looking at what we need to do to set up all the workforce, the skills, the technology and manufacturing capacity to make sure that where we get to in the next 5 years will actually set us on a pathway and a trajectory to absolute zero rapidly. Next slide. Eytan still gets to drive this, so now he's not.
I'll just add just a couple of things on this slide, because I think it's probably the point where we've been able to, I guess, cross-check our numbers with other things that are coming out. And the Clean Energy Council came out with their I forgot what it's called now, but their jobs plan last week, and they were talking about building out 30 gigawatts of renewable energy, and they had calculated that came to 50,000 jobs. So, you know, so we're definitely now from lots of different angles getting a good sense that our numbers are in the right direction. And yeah, just worth pointing out also on the 10 new transmission projects that you know, 8 of those projects, and many of you will be aware of this, have already been identified in the AEMO integrated systems plan, and you know, deemed to be economic, and are now just moving on to the next stage of that process, which could take as long as 2 years. So, you know, we're calling, you know, a lot of this is not even calling for the government to do anything in particular, except, you know, cut some of that process time to make sure that these transmission lines that we know have to be built can be built quicker. So when you hear about cutting green tape and stuff to enable mines, really, it's another kind of tape, I'm not sure which color, that's holding back a lot of these jobs. And also worth, you know, and I think the importance, this slide also shows the importance of having a wider integrated plan, because if you're just talking about renewables, you're missing out on the potential for manufacturing jobs. So one of the things that we're talking about when you have a pipeline this big of renewable energy is obviously local procurement policies are going to be really important, so that we kickstart manufacturing industries on the back of this, such as manufacturing jobs for wind turbines, which can also create lots of jobs.
That's true, and we're already seeing our manufacturing sector, like the car industry that's gone offshore, being reappropriated and adapted to make sure that we can meet future needs for this country in this country, which is really exciting. And to Eytan's point as well, we are coordinating behind the scenes with the major think tanks around Australia and other advocacy groups, just to make sure that we're all working from the best available data on where these jobs are and what those numbers are. So definitely let me know first if you see anything come out that doesn't indicate that we'll be within the same range, because at the moment we're doing a lot of work to make sure that we are feeding into and sharing the data that we're generating behind the scenes, and also that we're working where others have been able to find really solid data around jobs, energy, skills, and the economic benefits of these initiatives. So the next slide is on my favourite pet topic, retrofitting homes and buildings. So many years ago, I was one of the project managers on our plan to retrofit every building in Australia to achieve energy freedom, it ended up being called. I worked on the Zero Carbon Australia Buildings Plan, and I think out of the following publications on energy freedom homes, you'll see there's just enormous potential for everyone to get on with doing this today. What this is really pointing to, though, is that there's enormous economic benefits and a huge sensibility in just coordinating an approach to how we upgrade all our buildings. So people are doing this anyway. Millions of Australians live in wildly inefficient homes. We pay some of the highest energy bills in the world for heating and cooling our homes. Our building standards are not up to scratch yet. They're some of the worst. What we can do here is actually retrofit, bring forward work that's happening anyway, retrofit these buildings, make a coordinated approach to that, and give everyone, as many people as we can, bill-free homes. Like this here it's eminently doable. It is already being done by overseas, where we look at France's current approach to retrofitting 500,000 homes every year. It's been undertaken in the US, Ireland, and elsewhere. And I think in Australia we can't use the term pink bats anymore with credibility, but we have got the skilled workforce and the types of products that we need to be able to get all of our homes to be much more efficient. This proposal here, we'll be looking to retrofit, do that deep retrofit, upgrade building fabric, deploy solar, batteries, other types of building upgrades that are needed, get everyone off gas. So we're looking at doing that at a rate of about 500,000 per year, maybe more, but we'll get to about 3 to 5 million homes and public and commercial buildings. We're looking at a massive solar rollout across schools and hospitals. We'd certainly be recommending to start this program with social housing and low-income homes to make sure that those people who can least afford to turn the heater on this winter are the ones who end up with the energy and affordability benefits of these building upgrades first. These numbers, depending on how big we can get our retrofit program, and possibly even including things like new builds being upgraded to be all zero energy, We'll see how close we can get to the 400,000 target. Michael Lord, who's leading this piece of research, has indicated I should be less ambitious. So we'll watch this space and see where the numbers land in a couple of weeks. Next slide, Eytan. So modernising and expanding Australia's manufacturing. So just today, or yesterday, I think, the Grattan Institute's latest report came out on green steel. They're looking at 25,000 jobs for Australians between the Hunter Valley and central Queensland. Like, that's a really exciting outcome for, like, quite specifically, like, one part of the manufacturing sector. And of course, BZE did our report a couple of years ago now, end of 2018, I think, when we released our Electrifying Industry report. So in our report and in our current research, we've identified all of the alternatives that there are to using gas for industrial process heat in our factories. We know that you can make so many products here in Australia using all electricity and renewable energy to power all of our factories. How that happens has been largely piecemeal, and we're definitely really excited. I'm really excited to hear how many conversations are starting now in the conversation around stimulus that are looking at supporting Australian manufacturers to make the shift and to then expand and run on cheap renewable energy. One of the factories I'm working with is actually, no, I was making the link, Eytan, that was okay. One of the factories that I'm working with in the manufacturing sector is actually one that makes grinding media for our mines. See, that was the link there. That was the bridging sentence looking at the mining sector. So we've got all these jobs in manufacturing in Australia, up to 300,000. We'll see where that number lands again. These are rubbery numbers now. And when we move on to the mining sector, you can see that our manufacturers will still need to make the products and the equipment that we can use on our mine sites to decarbonise our mine sites and even the products that they're using. So go to mining now, next slide. So when we look at the mining sector, we're looking at getting the minerals and the products and the what we actually need, the stuff we actually need to build all this renewable energy and to make renewable energy infrastructure, batteries, the poles and wires, wind turbines. We need Australia's minerals to be able to do that. And our mine sites, there are so many of them running on really high polluting diesel generators and really unhealthy places to work. So while we do need to make sure that we have a high level of social responsibility when it comes to our mining practices, part of that is actually powering our mine sites on renewables as well. We are seeing that, and we profile some examples in our Northern Territory report of where mining companies are already making a transition to renewable energy and doing massive solar or using solar to create hydrogen fuel cells that they're using on their mine sites now to be able to offset some of the toxic pollution that's coming out of their diesel generators. And it's giving them better fuel security and better opportunities to be able to, access the power that they need to power their site. So from mining, we're looking at the adding to the 150,000 people in Australia that are currently employed in non-fossil fuel mining and adding 10 to 30,000 jobs in this space. I think the latest draft has it just shy of 20,000 jobs in this space. But like I said, for all of them, watch where we land. We'll be refining these figures over the next couple of weeks. A really hot topic for lots of governments around Australia, all the states and territories, very interested in what we do with all of our waste. Over the last couple of years, since China has stopped taking our post-consumer waste, we've really needed to take a hard look at how we deal with our economy, and the phrase circular economy comes up all the time. We also know that a lot of care needs to be given to the end of life options for our solar panels, for our batteries, and we need to make sure that we're taking a holistic approach to managing life cycle impacts of renewable energy technologies. So here we're looking at our recycling industry building up. We're looking at post-consumer recycling. We may or may not end up including in this report the additional jobs that can come from recycling PVs and batteries. BZE has done some work in this space, but it's pre-publication at the moment, and it's really about timing to see how quickly we can get that piece of work edited and reviewed and ready to publish. But at the moment, we're still looking at least 25,000, around 30,000 jobs in this space here, just from doing post-consumer waste recycling in our country. Next slide. Electric transport. I'm really excited about electric buses. I've heard some really interesting ways, not just that the buses are being, retrofit. You can retrofit buses to become electric, but also the way that we can actually manufacture these buses in Australia. There are companies in Europe and Sweden in particular that are already building electric buses, and Australia has some really great opportunities to finance and build electric buses. With all of our cheap renewable energy, we can now look at the way that we have this widely distributed transport network in many of our sprawling cities. We need buses to be able to get around in between train lines, and electrifying our buses is a really great solution to being able to provide zero emissions public transport. How this actually rolls out, there's a few fantastic examples of integrating your charging stations with your bus depots, with EV, like fast charging infrastructure. So there's some really solid examples, and I think we'll see some changes soon in this country looking at how we electrify our buses, including off the back of the New South Wales government commitment to electrifying buses. The high-speed rail, of course, Beyond Zero Emissions did our high-speed rail report a couple of years ago now. We're looking at that as a potential to replace air travel along the eastern seaboard. I think we've got 2 other companies having input to the high-speed rail project that we're including in the Million Jobs Plan at the moment. And both of them are showing that there's an even more optimistic future for high-speed rail in Australia than what we thought there was a couple of years ago when we first published the BZE's high-speed rail report. And 50 to 100,000 jobs in making and operating renewable powered public transport and renewable powered high-speed rail. Next slide. Land restoration and carbon farming. So a couple of years ago, Beyond Zero Emissions released a very fat discussion paper looking at land use. Here we've been working with a number of organisations that deliver reforestation projects and carbon farming projects, and we're looking at how we can reforest about 55 mega hectares, around 30% of existing forests, over the next 10 years. It creates a lot of jobs, but also is the only sector that can not only get to zero emissions, but also draw down emissions and pollution out of the atmosphere. This is a fantastic opportunity as well for Indigenous rangers to be employed and to create easy access to tens of thousands of jobs over the next 10 years. So this is really looking at how we can build up a sector that is starting to become larger and more important part of our economy in Australia, and also a way that we can support our food system and the well-being of our farmers. Next slide. So we mentioned before about the way that Beyond Zero Emissions has really added to its core function as a research and think tank, the community-led projects through our zero carbon communities, and also our outreach and strategic support for business and industry through business and industry program. These community-led initiatives are primarily from our survey of our zero carbon communities, and also engaging with other databases that are being developed by project partners that we have been working with. So we have a huge spreadsheet, and I'm not sure, I haven't seen Michael Copsey's name online. If you're here, you've just dropped off my screen. Michael Copsey has done a spectacular job. He's a Banyule-based volunteer from the Banyule Clean Energy Group, And he has developed a spreadsheet of all the community-led initiatives. He's supported us to develop the economic and job calculations for these pieces of work. And we're really now coordinating which initiatives are in that long list of community-led initiatives and making sure that we're not duplicating any of those projects in our other chapters, so that we can be confident in how many additional jobs there are out there in community-led zero emissions activities. So I think at the moment, Michael's spreadsheet is up to about 140,000 jobs. But like I said, we're going to see where this lands, because we do need to do another cull of these just to make sure that we're not duplicating any of our assumptions. Next. There's still opportunities to get involved with our work. Our work only exists, and Beyond Zero Emissions, all of our work exists because we have such a fantastic volunteer network and an amazing outreach. This is a community that's been built up from, something that was quite small, I think, in 2009 when you started Eytan, to something where we have over 10,000 volunteer hours contributed every year to our work. This Million Jobs project is a point in time. This is something that we're doing for the next couple of months to really steer and make sure that our voice is clearly heard when people are making decisions about projects to invest in as we come out of the government economic recovery, we come out of coronavirus and recover into what comes next. This is one thing that you can do to help make this piece of work really shine and to help make our high-level initiatives grounded in local communities. We still have opportunities for people to get involved, to write their own community response plans that translate those big ideas about the million jobs and turn them into something that's really relevant and focuses on initiatives that your community really wants to lead. There's still a lot of case studies and projects in the pipeline that we may not have heard about yet. So if you have a great idea about a zero emissions project that fits into one of our categories, do check in, make sure that it's something that's already on our radar. We are writing policy recommendations for some of these areas as well, especially when we know that what is needed to bring these projects to life is actually just paperwork. Something needs to change about the way that the rules exist. We'll also be identifying when there's government finance needed or whether private equity can carry the load of delivering these projects. So those enablers will also be described in our work. And if you have ideas or a specific area of expertise you'd like to contribute, please let us know. And by all means, today, and as you see further publications coming to light, please do make sure that your networks know what you know about the good work that can happen in the zero emissions, a clean economy recovery out of the coronavirus. Here's how you can follow Eytan on Twitter. Oh, and Beyond Zero News, you've added that as well. That's great. And sending your ideas in, especially if you've got links to projects or you've got documents you want to share with us, send them all through to the info@bze email address, and we'll filter that through to the right person, research team, to take it up with you. We set aside quite a lot of time now to be able to do some questions and answers about specific things. I can see there's about 35 unread messages on my part. And Eytan, I think you made a good call to get John to help us turn these into most pertinent questions there. I was totally ambitious thinking we could do that for ourselves.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And I'd also just like to obviously thank Heidi for leading this project. It's been a big push. I think time is of the essence. And I think the history of stimulus is that it's the ideas that are detailed and ready to go that are much more likely to be funded, which is why BZE have really put ourselves under pressure to get something out, because we know there's going to be a lot of projects, let's say, that we don't want to get funding that are going to be presented. So we really need to see some positive visions with enough detail to be seriously considered, ready to go.
Okay, so thank you very much, Eytan and Heidi. As you said, there's lots of questions here and lots of great suggestions as well that we'll pass on, even if you don't get to ask the question. I wondered if we might start with Sally Hunter. Sally's one of many people who's thrown in examples of great potential opportunities in the region that she comes from. Sally, can you ask your question at this point?
Yep, sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Thanks for your preso, guys. Really appreciate it. So we're in Narrabri, and obviously that's a very prominent place at the moment for the COVID Commission has announced that they like the idea of a fertiliser plant at Narrabri that can be powered by the gas at the Narrabri gas field. So our community has prepared our own response, and we would prefer to have a net zero future in Narrabri, and we would prefer to use the gas of hydrogen if fertiliser was to be produced there. And we have put together quite a comprehensive plan through our not-for-profit organisation, and we'd really love to know how it is that we could bring that forward to BZE and have you take it forward on our behalf.
Yeah, we are working to really amplify these amazing initiatives. So congratulations, because yeah, we know what a huge effort it is to get a piece of work like that happening. We're collaborating with a lot of people and we're amplifying what you do. So what we can do, if you send it to me, use the info@ email address, we'll find the right person to get back to you to link it into the relevant part of our big picture work, and then talk about the best way that we can help do some local outreach or some national promotion about where our opportunities and where our interests align. So it'd be great to stay in touch and to hear some more about your report.
Fantastic. Thanks, Heidi. I'll take that up.
And just on the topic of amplifying, I think it's important to say that this is, BZE is a pretty low ego organisation, and the point of this project isn't to get BZE on the map, it's to try to get an outcome that I think we all want. So, just like, you just had a conversation about the BZE report amplifying your work, BZE is also speaking to a lot of other, not the usual, voices like, business umbrella organisations and those sorts of things, to seed our ideas and have them present them up too, because I think what we really want is the outcome, and we're not really too fussed who talks, whether it's BZE that's talking about it or someone else that has more influence. That's fine.
Okay, a question from Penny Howard. Penny, I'm hoping you're there, about the kinds of jobs that opportunities that might open up, and particularly the issues about the quality of those jobs and links to the trade union movement. Penny?
Yeah, thanks so much for the work that you've done. It's wonderful to see the plans that you're putting ahead, and I think the work is really relevant not only because of the current economic crisis we're in, but also the broader political situation that we've been in, and particularly what was shown with the outcome of the last election. So I've been working with people in the union movement for a jobs-based approach to climate action. I'm from the Maritime Union, so for our members working in offshore oil and gas, our future jobs are in the offshore wind industry. But I think there's a real need to expand that across all sectors of the economy, putting forward the kinds of plans that you've done. So it's incredibly useful. The obstacle that we have, though, is how do we ensure that those are going to be good jobs, right? Because if people who, at the beginning, when you opened up talking about old analog jobs, those jobs do tend to be covered by union agreements. People have got good wages, conditions built up over decades, and workers have also got the experience of having workplaces automated, lots of their workmates losing their jobs. So this transition to a digital economy is quite difficult for a lot of people. So I think that needs to be somehow embedded into your plan as well, if we're going to be able to kind of make it something that can be taken up broadly across the community as well, and get through some of those big political obstacles that we have. So really keen to hear your thoughts on that, and also the potential for working a bit more with the union movement on that as well.
Thank you, Penny. It is incredibly important to us. I think you probably heard how proud I was to talk about the work that the BZE team did with Climate Justice Union in West Australia on our Collie report. Like it's incredible what can be done when we can collaborate like this, and the concerns that you're raising, like they're valid points. Like we need to make sure that these jobs are high quality jobs, that they're real jobs, they're long term, they're relevant. And that's a big part of like why a lot of our emphasis at the moment, when you look at those regional areas where there's a lot of unionised workers in fossil fuel jobs, it's about the manufacturing sector really playing a huge role in what comes next. Australia has the raw minerals, it has the resources there. It's really about how we value add to that with cheap renewable energy before we sell, especially export, any of these things that we make. So for this project now, we're working with a couple of unions, but we are not yet working with the Maritime Union. If that's something I think we can do together, I'd love to hear about it. And I'd also like to point out that this is a point in time piece of work, and we are here today to talk about the million jobs, the economic stimulus recovery. We have a huge piece of ongoing work going on in the region over the next 12 months, and that will be deeply engaged with local unions and with representatives there. So think of the short term and the long term if you've got opportunities for unions to engage with us.
Great, thank you.
And a question perhaps related to this from Su Sien Kwan about white collar, different kinds of employment opportunities.
I think one of the interesting. Oh, sorry. No, I thought that was the question.
Go ahead.
No, go ask the question before I answer it. That's pretty typical.
Well, thank you first up for doing the presentation. It's really exciting for, I guess, people like me who don't really know a lot about what the opportunities are for Australia transition to mostly renewables, and this is pretty exciting. However, I think, coming from where I'm sitting as a white collar project manager person, it's not clear like how I can participate in future jobs going forward. And I guess my question around is really what is the career pathway or the training pathway for people who want to participate in these 1 million jobs?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really good question. And Heidi, I've got even more recent information than maybe even you do, because there was a meeting that I was just in before this. So, I think training is a really interesting area of this plan that obviously is hard to just put in any one section of it. It's kind of like underlying everything when you're talking about new jobs or, all these people that are going to be working on home retrofits. I mean, we don't have enough people that are able to do that kind of work at the moment. So training is a really key part of this. So we have been working with RMIT at the moment on what large scale training programs would look like to get people skilled up. And we're talking about thousands of jobs in the tertiary sector, in the TAFE sector, to skill people up to be able to move around into these kinds of jobs. Learning from the Pink Bats episode, there's also going to need to be, pretty good public sector oversight of these programs as well. So there's going to be more jobs in those kinds of areas and those oversight areas as well to ensure these are rolled out effectively. But there's another question there that's kind of related to this as well. Around, we talk about how many jobs will be created, but how many jobs will be lost. And I think that there's an underlying anxiety in a lot of these style of questions. We're talking about something new. We're talking about a shift from analog to digital. So what happens to what all those jobs? Are those people just going to be left behind that are working in those analog style industries? And there's two ways to answer that. One of the answers is that shift is happening anyway. And if anything, we're seeing through the coronavirus situation that if anything, that trend's accelerating. Fossil fuel prices are at historic lows. There's a lot of planned expansions in exploration that probably won't be happening now. So if anything, that acceleration is happening, and we're offering a positive alternative of where new jobs can be found. Clearly there's a bridge there to how do we get people moving from those old style jobs to those new style jobs, and training is going to be a big part of it. I think a lot of our community initiatives are going to be a big part of that as well. Like, what are the jobs in your local area and where can you fit in, making that more visible. But ultimately that is going to be always a big challenge of a big vision like this, but it's a challenge that our society is going to have to face anyway, because with this plan or without this plan, this shift is going to happen. And the benefit of having a plan like this is that it gives us at least the opportunity to put the training around it, to put the oversight around it, and to put those pathways in as part of it, rather than just letting it all happen in a messy way, because I think it's going to happen faster than the status quo is expecting anyway.
I think the next question is from John Shield.
Hey, hello. Yeah, hi. Thanks for taking the question. I know that commercial buildings and that take about, or give about 45% of the emissions of Australia for all buildings. And yet the buildings plan only showed about a 20% retrofit cost in capital cost. So I was wondering, have we missed something in terms of retrofitting commercial buildings and perhaps even industrial buildings? For example, a food shop, I know that their gas and perhaps you know, electric stoves are going full time from the time you walk in the door. So I'm just wondering, have we fully explored the industrial and the commercial area of buildings for retrofits?
Thanks, John. And for anyone who doesn't know, John's one of our longest term, largest contributing volunteers at BZE, based in Newcastle and the Hunter. So thanks for dialing into this, as well as all your work and emails over the weekend. The commercial building sector is one that obviously the buildings industry is far more advanced in than the residential sector. So for commercial buildings, we've had green ratings for much longer. We've had more aspiration in that sector as well from the Green Building Council and the Property Council. This morning I was presenting the Million Jobs work to the Property Council Sustainability Group, and it's pretty clear that they certainly see enormous opportunities to do the same approach that we're talking about. Identify the types of initiatives that are going to happen anyway and bring forward those sustainability upgrades that have to be in the pipeline. I think with the commercial buildings, we're certainly seeing that the low-hanging fruit has already been widely adopted. So when you look at your A and B grade buildings, they've already had the easy to upgrade pieces done. There's certainly, I think, more work around making sure that gas-fired cogen and trigen is replaced as a matter of urgency, and also that our large portfolio and asset managers are coordinating and getting behind large-scale power purchasing agreements for renewable energy to make sure that they're eliminating emissions from the way that they manage their stock. So I think over the next couple of weeks, the Facility Managers Association is coming out with some initiatives that they think that we could get behind. And we're definitely interested to see how much of that can be adopted into a plan to retrofit millions of buildings around the country, including commercial buildings. Thanks, John.
So this is a question from Fatima Shana, who's had to leave the call, but I think it's still going to be relevant to many. It's a question about gender and the extent to which you're taking account of opportunities for men and women in the kinds of jobs that are being created. So I wonder if you could speak to that briefly.
We are not specifying what gender you have to be to do work in the plan.
Sure.
It's been a conversation with some of our advisory panel around making sure that we are clearly identifying roles that are typically female-based roles in the economic recovery, and we're certainly working and liaising with people across the social services sector as well to make sure that what we're promoting doesn't run counter to some of those initiatives that's pretty widespread in the social services sector, to make sure that the benefits that can come from a really smart recovery are widely shared among all members of our community, especially those who don't have a strong voice in this space.
Yep. Thank you. Probably time for just one or two more questions. This question from Anthony Kent.
Hello. Hi. Yeah, look, thank you to you both, and you probably see the text, but it's really continuing on a theme that's been recurrent, and that is the type of jobs. And I guess my question is, in terms of your research, are you getting much direct labour market research? And what I'm curious about is we're talking about the type of jobs that will be created in this sector. And I think a good indication of that will be the type of jobs that have already being created in this sector. And I'm thinking of the usual stuff that we're interested in, whether they're casual, permanent, part-time, the level of skills involved, and broader questions about supply chains and agglomeration links.
Right. So I think it's fair to say I can be clear about some things, and then others will depend on particular aspects of the economy that we're talking about. The jobs that we're talking about are full-time equivalent jobs. So you'll see the way that we dealt with that in our Collie report as well, that some sectors are more or less likely to actually have full-time employees in full-time equivalent positions. So some sectors, they're much more typically to have 4-day-a-week employees. So you'll end up with more people employed. But our projects are specifying a full-time equivalency. So there may actually be more people employed in delivering these if they're working less than a 5-day-a-week load. The labour market experts, I'm just looking at your question here. So what labour market experts do we have working with us? I'm not a labour market expert. I don't think anyone is an expert. If you have someone who wants to work with us, do let me know. Otherwise, what we do to specify our jobs is we look at evidence from other initiatives like this, and we build up case studies and around those, the evidence base for those assumptions and for those predictions about what can come next.
And also, I'll just add very quickly on that, that one of the issues with the current decarbonisation transition has been because there hasn't been an overall plan for it. It's been, particularly with renewables, it's been a pretty boom bust kind of ride, and you could say that with lots of other things, same with solar installations, although that's definitely becoming a lot more steady. Obviously with some of the stimulus programs from the last financial crisis, and when companies are feeling insecure around how long the current ride's going to last, it makes it hard to commit to long-term employment and all that sort of stuff. So one of the benefits of a longer-term plan like this is that security of pipeline and of work. So that means that you can then go to those companies and say, look, we're putting a proposal together that's going to provide long-term secure pipeline for your business. So in exchange, we expect you to provide that for your employees and not rely on casual staff and all that sort of thing. I think that's a much easier conversation to have than a company that's undergoing severe kind of booms and busts and really needs to be able to grow and shrink its workforce to meet it if it wants to stay in business.
And our last question is from Robert McLean. Robert?
Thanks, John. Hello? Hello,
Yes.
Can you hear me? Obviously you can't hear me. No, sorry, you can't hear me, John.
Oh,
you can hear me.
I can hear you. Yes, go ahead.
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. I live in Shepparton, about 18 kilometres from Tatura, which is a small town, has a large milk factory, and that whole town is on the verge of running out of power in terms of the grid is not large enough to supply the power. So can Bees here to help with that idea? How do we do that?
I'm working with a couple of dairy factories. A couple of people got in touch with me over the weekend about dairy factories in northern Victoria. I may already be, but
okay.
send an email to the info out just to make sure. This could be the third factory in northern Victoria. That would be awesome. Otherwise, it's an extra vote for one of the two.
This one's at Tatura. It's national, I think.
Let's email about it. Thank you.
The grid system is almost.
Thanks, Robert.
Thanks, guys.
That's all the questions we've got
John.
time for today. But just before we finish, Eytan and Heidi, do you want to say anything more about next steps and how you'd like people to contribute to the project?
Only to reinforce, email us your tips and suggestions. I know that there's been some come up in the chat already. We are looking for everyone's support when we release these papers. They'll be coming out in stages over the next 6 to 8 weeks. So you'll see chapter at a time released as a briefing paper, and before we do our final ta-da, and we maybe can come back to you then, John, and do another presentation on where everything lands at the end of the day.
That sounds great. In a minute, I'll ask everyone to virtually thank Eytan and Heidi, but first just to highlight a few upcoming seminars, and I think you'll see these are highlighted on the screen. Next Wednesday, a presentation from Climate Works on their Future Solutions project. On the 20th, Damon Jones on international climate negotiations. And on the 21st of May, a presentation from Stephen Pollard on local approaches to community scale carbon neutrality. We'd encourage everyone to register on the Energy Transition Hub and Climate Energy College's website if you'd like to hear more about these and other forthcoming seminars. So we're going to finish now, although, as I said, I think Heidi and possibly Eytan are happy to stay on the line a little bit for a further conversation. We won't be recording that, but if you want to stay on the line, please do so. Beyond that, I'd like to thank Heidi and Eytan and everyone who's taken the time to join the webinar. We look forward to seeing you at future Hub and College webinars, and goodbye and all the best.
Thank you.